Hello and welcome to Headlines Special on Ukraine. After 4 hours of talks in Saudi Arabia, American and Russian negotiators, in addition to having come up with the basic contours of a three-stage plan to end the war in Ukraine, also appear to have laid the foundations of what one may tentatively call a common understanding as to what happened back in late February 2022 and what has been happening since then. Whilst hitting back at Ukraine's complaint that it had been left out of the ongoing US-Russia talks, President Donald Trump criticized Volodymyr Zelenskyy, saying that any negotiator could have secured a settlement years ago without the loss of much land. The US leader also appeared to have accused Ukraine of starting the war when, in response to Kyiv's publicly expressed concerns on being excluded from talks, he said, quote, "You should have never started it, and you could have made a deal." Donald Trump went as far as to question the electoral legitimacy of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, claiming that his approval rating sat at 4%, prompting a strong reaction from the Ukrainian leader, stating that US President was trapped in a Russian-made disinformation bubble and that his country was not for sale. For many external observers, it remains a matter of fundamental importance that the destiny of a given nation, in this particular case, that of Ukraine, cannot be decided upon without its active participation, and attempting to achieve a sustainable and long-term solution without taking into account Kyiv's basic needs would not work at all. However, with Ukraine slowly but steadily losing ground against Russia on the battlefield, many worry and believe that this is not time for elated principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Interestingly enough, although President Donald Trump has been seemingly dismissive of the Ukrainian participation in the recent ongoing talks, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is now said to have stated that US President Donald Trump told him that Ukraine would take part in the future peace talks. With the likelihood of a Trump-Putin meeting growing exponentially, now almost on a daily basis, we all happen to be in the realm of what is fashionable to call these days constantly evolving situation. And some commentators are now inclined to contend that the great unthinkable as to Ukraine is now becoming perfectly thinkable. Whatever this enigmatic way of putting things does actually mean is another question. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Alec Katzman, Protect Ukraine Now organization, joining from Chicago, United States, and Mr. Michael Pregent, analyst and former defense intelligence officer, joining from Washington, D.C., United States.
Hello, good evening. Good to see you.
Yes. My first question is going to be addressed to Mr. Pregent. Allow me to be very blunt here. Donald Trump earlier said that Ukraine may one day end up being Russian. And he also added that Ukraine realistically cannot be expected to restore its pre-2014 borders. And recently he appeared to have accused Ukraine of starting the war, at least of not doing enough to avert the war. How hopeful do you think that Ukraine should be under the current circumstance when it comes to its future fate?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, I'll tell you right now, I voted for President Trump, like a lot of Republicans did. And he just created a schism within the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. The Republicans in the Senate, in the House, in the Pentagon are going to be opposed to this, opposed to this decision. We have to remember that Russia invaded Ukraine. And we also have to remember that Trump said this war wouldn't have never started on his watch. Mm-hmm. The goal of the Trump administration should not be that no war starts during his administration. It should be that no war starts after his administration. Because all he's doing at this point, whether you look at Gaza or whether you look at Ukraine, is trying to get all these things taken care of as quickly as possible to ensure there's no conflict on his watch. And all that means is that the day after he leaves office, Putin will feel like he can go get more. Mm-hmm. With regards to the Middle East, the same kind of thing. And I think that's what Republicans are having a problem with right now, and Democrats and Americans, to be honest with you. We look at Russia as the enemy. We look at Ukraine as the victim in this war. And to basically say these things the president is saying goes against everything that that we stand for when it comes to national security and foreign policy. What I mean by that is you do not give concessions to your enemies. You do not give them, you do not appease your enemies. All it does is embolden them. Now, if the deal is, Putin, don't take any more territory while I'm president, then Putin takes more territory the day after Trump leaves. And that's what I think this looks like right now. Trump is creating a permissive environment for our adversaries the day he leaves office. They get to regroup, refit, rearm, re-strategize for the day after Trump leaves. We talk about the day after Gaza. We talk about the day after Ukraine, the Ukraine war. We now need to talk about the day after the Trump presidency.
Mr. Katzman, what is your fundamental thought about Trump's Ukraine policy, and bearing in mind what he has said already and what he is likely to do, how hopeful are you that Ukraine will be able to achieve a proper, sensible deal under his administration whilst he is President of the United States?
Well, President Trump many times said about peace through strength. The problem at the moment is a strength component is missing. Mm-hmm. As we can see from negotiations in Riyadh, Rubio, Waltz, and Witkoff, if you look at their faces before we even talk about the content of the conversation, you can say they're not very happy. As you know, Americans like to smile. They're not smiling. They're very grim. They definitely not happy with the negotiations the way they go. And you can also tell they're repeating what Mr. Trump is saying. They're not going with their own thoughts and ideas. Now, going to the content, we can tell that they only talking about beginning conversations, things like reestablishing embassies, talking about geopolitical, economical collaborations. Nothing of it, nothing has to do with war.
Mr. Katzman, Biden administration, the previous administration in Washington, D.C. used to say that this is a matter of principle for the United States of America. They would defend Ukraine up to the hilt. Russia should not be allowed to win. Ukraine cannot be allowed to be defeated. And now, on the basis of what Trump is saying, whatever the consequences of what he's saying are going to be is another question, of course. Would it be right to conclude that for President Trump, Ukraine is not just a country whose sovereignty is sort of transactional, but also Ukraine as a whole is somewhat, I'm terribly sorry for using this word, but expendable as well?
Well, Mr. Trump is in a difficult situation as well. Mm-hmm. Mr. Biden said the right words. Now, there are no complaints about the words that he said. So maybe I would have a problem with as long as it takes, because it doesn't have any specifics. However, in practice, we could see very measured, very slow deliveries of military assistance. Ukraine had a great chance to stop the aggressor in the summer of 2022, maybe fall 2022. That opportunity was lost because weapons were delivered very slowly and in low quality and kinds of equipment. If you remember, Ukraine had to beg for every new kind of equipment that was going to be sent to them for assistance.
Okay.
So to go back to Mr. Trump, he has now to deal with a fallout, a situation where territory is lost. Yeah. As we know, following the previous world wars, first and second, their means of attack are significantly more costly than the means of defense. So for Ukrainians to retake the territory right now is significantly more difficult. Again, I'm not justifying Mr. Trump. He's wrong in his rhetorics. He needs to find a strength component. He needs to provide Ukraine with military assistance. He needs to continue sponsoring the development of drone technologies inside Ukraine. He needs to provide air defense and jets.
Mr. President, officially, both sides agreed, broadly of course, on three fundamental goals: restoring staffing at their respective embassies in Washington, D.C. and Moscow. Number two, to create the high-level group to support delegations to support Ukraine peace talks, and also explore closer relations and economic cooperation. Mr. Rubio earlier said that, Secretary of State said that also the talks about unlocking the door for, I think, incredible opportunities to partner with Russia. Are we presently in the presence of a process wherein Russia and the United States of America are normalizing their relations, with the subject involving Ukraine being viewed as a problem in need of being sorted out? Because the impression given is that it's fundamentally about the bilateral relationship between Russia and the United States, and they want this issue revolving around Ukraine being fixed for the time being, for those bilateral relations to be properly normalized at this stage. Do you share the same sentiment, or you think that the bigger picture is far more complicated and this analysis is not based on the reality?
No, the former.
Yeah.
The former. The issue with the president right now is he doesn't look at Ukraine as a problem. He looks at Zelenskyy as a problem. He believes that if there were new elections, you'd have a more favorable outcome for the United States and Russia. A deal would be the $500 billion in precious minerals to go to the United States would be fast-tracked. Zelenskyy has said Ukraine is not for sale. The Ukraine envoy, General Kellogg, has said that Zelenskyy will not go with any peace deal that is worked out without him being part of it. Now, Kellogg should have been at that seat in Riyadh, right? It should have been Marco Rubio. It should have been Waltz, of course, and it should have been Kellogg instead of Witkoff. Kellogg is on the opposite side of this. So is the Trump administration building a team of rivals so the president gets the best message, the best decision after hearing the arguments between his team of rivals? I don't think that's happening. What we're seeing, just like our friend in Ukraine said, we're seeing Marco Rubio. He's against this. We know the Rubio position on this. We know Mark Waltz's position on this. The president is transactional, and the message that the president is sending is, take territory, any country. If you can take territory, and the U.S. president will make it a transactional agreement after, meaning you will be able to keep what you've taken, and then you just have to stop. That's the message that he's sending to Putin right now. That's the message that he's sending to China. That's the message that he's sending to Iran in the Middle East. And those messages, are resonating with our adversaries, because peace through strength, and I agree, the strength part is not there. Twice the president has used this rhetoric. Take Gaza, for example. All the hostages need to be out or all hell is going to break loose. He said that twice. And on 2 occasions, nothing happened. Our adversaries are listening to this bravado, this rhetoric, this peace through strength message, and they're seeing that it's weak. There's nothing behind it. And our adversaries are going to take advantage of this. And the president's isolationist members in this team of rivals need to realize that concessions and appeasement do not stop people like Putin, do not stop countries like Iran and China from continuing to get all they can. So the president is creating a permissive environment that he does not seem to be aware of at this moment.
Mr. Katzman, what do you make of the comment made by President Trump that President Zelenskyy effectively accused Zelenskyy of not being legitimate? I think what he said, that his approval ratings are down to 4%, and it looks like that new elections in Ukraine appears to be part of the 3-stage peace plan currently being discussed between the United States and Russia. What do you make of that particular comment? Or do you think that if there are going to be elections in Ukraine, that will actually exacerbate the circumstances for Kiev?
Well, Ukraine definitely needs elections. The question is, though, when and how, and that should be up to Ukrainian people to decide when that happens. Ideally, the war should be stopped. There should be ceasefire, and then Ukraine can conduct proper elections. But they're definitely necessary. Trump is not wrong about that.
But what I want to understand, Russians are publicly questioning President Zelensky's legitimacy. They're saying that he does not represent the interests of the Ukrainian people. And what President Trump has said very recently was that within that 3-stage peace process, elections should happen probably first, and then the deal could be attained. It looks like Russians and the current administration in Washington, D.C. are looking at that subject in a similar way. Do you think this is a cause for concern?
Well, there's a lot of things that can be done in that respect. For example, the decisions and signatories could be the Parliament of Ukraine, Verkhovna Rada. Zelenskyy has a lot of moves he can do while remaining a president, but shifting decision making into other folks who don't have their terms up.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Mr. President, currently we are in the presence of some important developments. It looks like we're not entirely sure what will happen, but we are observing some of the key linchpins of the process in the making. As an analyst, as a man of great experience, do you believe that for all our commitment to international law and related legal principles, the fundamentals of what may eventually emerge to be truncated Ukraine, with its eastern provinces being lost, actually may be deemed as in the offing? So you see this process happening now. We see arguments being made by different sides that the compromise should be made. Do you notice and discern the self-same?
I do. I mean, if you look at what the Biden administration was asking Zelenskyy to do once Russia moved in, they said, get out of Kyiv now. You have 3 days to get out because the Russians are going to be there. He stayed, and we've shown, and this is the best ally you want. Somebody on the ground willing to fight against one of your adversaries. And that's what the Ukrainian military are. They speak the language. They know the neighborhoods. They know the terrain. They know who's not supposed to be there. They're very capable. And in that, they brought the U.S. grudgingly along to support it in the last administration. Now we're here, where the president has made these statements like, "I will end the war day one," and you can't surrender Crimea, the Donbass region, the Luhansk region to Putin and say, "Okay, are you happy? Is that enough for you?" Because it won't be enough. It basically rewards Putin's aggression and says that if you take territory, you'll be able to keep it eventually. And that is a problem. That should be a problem for NATO. That should be a problem for any country that's worried about being next on Putin's radar, right? And then being able to take it off the board right now, saying that Ukraine could never be part of NATO in the future. That is a problem also, because it basically says if Putin invades a non-NATO country, he's guaranteeing that country that he just invaded will not ever fall under the Article 5 of NATO, meaning if an invasion against a NATO country, will require full response from all NATO countries. This is very concerning for those that want to see Putin's aggression stop, and certainly concerning for the free world if you border a country like China or Russia.
Mr. Katzman, President Zelenskyy recently said that Ukrainian army is quite resilient, and it's the most resilient army in Europe, and it guarantees the opportunity to speak with dignity and on equal footing with other partners, allies and non-allies. We understand there's a rhetorical element what he's saying. It's about making sure that everybody understands that Ukraine will defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty, whatever the cost may be. But also there is a realpolitik, and there are certain limitations to what Ukraine can do. In view of those security guarantees that Ukraine has been talking about all along the way, about US presence, and bearing in mind that this is not going to happen, what kind of security guarantees entailed within that deal that Ukraine and Russia may eventually sign would be sufficient for the time being? For the time being, what I really mean by that is that there could be some sort of interim deal which will allow Ukraine to recover its resources and also stop Russia advancing on the battlefield. What kind of guarantees Ukraine may consider as sort of acceptable at this juncture?
Certainly. So I cannot speak for President Zelenskyy.
Sure.
But what they really can benefit from is help with drone manufacturing. They have a lot of innovative companies doing amazing things, but they need help to scale this up. Next, they need help with building fortifications. They definitely need more air defense. They need jets to protect their skies. As you may have heard, there's a big problem from gliding air bombs. And to mitigate that problem, Ukraine needs air presence. They need to be able to shoot at jets that launching those gliding bombs. So again, this is a strength component that is currently missing. President Trump still has $5.8 billion in PDA authority that he inherited from President Biden. He can use that authority to transfer necessary equipment. Furthermore, the other program, USI program, is being used for future deliveries. There are about $11 billion in that program that are still not under any sort of contract. That money can be reallocated and used to sponsor drone manufacturing inside Ukraine. Those things will definitely guarantee that Putin cannot advance any further. Well, again, there could be other things, but this is a minimum.
This is a minimum, and that may be good enough to be going on with, as I understood from what you said. Well, I'm grateful to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for your time and for your very detailed answers.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was Alec Katzman from Protect Ukraine Now organization. He joined from Chicago, United States, and also Michael Pregent, political analyst and former defense intelligence officer, who joined from Washington, D.C., United States. See you very soon.